Under the low hum of the ocean, where sunlight thins and bends into silver, a forgotten city lies waiting. Not imagined, not mythic, but traced faintly in real coordinates once marked by French cartographers in 1753. Latitude 36 degrees north, longitude 14 degrees west, west of the Pillars of Hercules. There, the currents drift in slow spirals, concealing terraces of limestone and coral that human eyes have not touched in millennia. Divers who came before spoke of shapes glimpsed through the blue. An archway, a plaza, steps that led to nothing. Most dismissed it as coincidence, an illusion of basalt and shadow. But then came the coral that grew along perfect lines, and the shards of pottery unlike anything from known Mediterranean cultures. Someone long before Athens or Rome had built there. A modern diver drifts through the water, breath slow, each exhale curling upward like smoke. The sea around him glows faintly with green light. Beneath him, through the veil of plankton, streets begin to appear. Faint grids of coral and limestone, their edges softened by centuries of silt. A single spire rises, its top broken, its base surrounded by stone rings, like ripples carved into eternity. The city lies open beneath him, luminous and still, its walls coated with living lace. He passes over reliefs where figures kneel before waves. Their faces are worn away, but their gestures remain. Palms open, heads bowed toward the horizon. In the folds of the carvings, small fish flicker like candle flames. He imagines this place before it drowned. Terraces glinting in the sun, courtyards filled with water gardens, priests murmuring to the wind. They must have known the sea not as enemy but as kin. Archaeologists have found traces of similar faiths. The Minoans of Thera who painted dolphins in their shrines. The Phoenicians who carried shells as offerings to the goddess of the deep. At the heart of the ruin, his torch finds a circular platform carved with spirals. Each groove runs inward, always inward, until the stone seems to breathe. Around it, small altars lie half-buried, each holding the remnants of conch shells. One still glimmers with nacre. When he lifts it, grains of sand slide through the spiral, producing a soft, resonant hum. Scientists later confirmed that the spiral matches the geometry of ocean currents along the mid-Atlantic ridge, an ancient map drawn not of land, but of flow. The people who built this place must have watched the sea with a reverence deeper than fear, charting its movement like astronomers of water. Fragments of inscriptions retrieved nearby mention a ceremony known as the Offering of Breath. The phrase appears in languages that never met, fragments of early Greek, traces of Proto-Berber, and something older unclassified. Each describes a ritual in which rulers descended into the tide, releasing their final exhale to the deep. Not sacrifice, but surrender. To give one's breath was to become part of the ocean's memory. The diver feels it, even now, a pressure soft and ancient, wrapping around him. His instruments crackle. Bubbles drift past like tiny ghosts. Deeper still, a colonnade stands untouched. Algae sway along its steps like slow-burning incense. Inside, along the ceiling, he finds shapes that once formed constellations. Not the ones we know, but a mirror of them, reversed as if viewed from beneath. A celestial map for those who lived below the horizon. And farther east, the ruins of Dvarka lie beneath the Arabian Sea. Submerged streets, columns, and anchors that some believe date to 1500 BCE. Another city that the ocean both erased and preserved. The diver realizes he is not exploring a single site but a pattern woven through time. Places where devotion met water and found eternity. He kneels on the seabed and sets his hand against the temple's floor. The stone is cool and faintly pulsing, as if the current itself passes through it. A small crab scuttles over an offering bowl turned upside down, its contents long dissolved. He watches as the crab disappears into a crack where faint light glows, perhaps from his lamp's reflection, perhaps from something else. A slow phosphorescence born of age and stillness. He thinks of the priests sealing the lower temple centuries ago. Carefully, deliberately. Perhaps they did not see it as burial but as preservation. To sink something sacred is to protect it from the noise of the world. Maybe they knew that one day, When the sea withdrew or human curiosity returned, someone would find it again and remember. He exhales slowly, and bubbles drift upward, breaking on the ceiling of waves. For a moment they look like rising prayers. On the surface, the sea lies calm, deceptive in its gentleness. The diver's ship floats above a city invisible to almost everyone. Waves lap softly against the hull, each one carrying grains of sand from ruins below. Tiny, luminous fragments of a civilization that never quite died. The sea has claimed many things, but it keeps its promises differently than time does. It does not erase. It distills. Everything becomes softer, quieter, and strangely whole. Perhaps the priests were right. That to sink is not to vanish. That divinity requires both air and silence. When night falls, the moon casts a long silver path across the bay. The diver watches the horizon fade into shadow, knowing that below him, stone pillars still stand, wrapped in seaweed and moonlight. The temple breathes through the water. The earth listens. Oceanographers often speak of ghost currents, layers of water that move in patterns centuries old, preserving salinity and temperature like memory. This city, lying in their path, seems caught in that same endless circulation, its stones still washed by the same pulse that buried it. Geological analysis later suggests that around 1600 BCE, an earthquake reshaped the seabed here. The city could have tilted gently, subsiding over decades until waves covered it entirely. Yet there are no signs of collapse, no debris from flight. Everything remains arranged, deliberate. Perhaps they knew. Perhaps they watched their temples sink with hymns instead of cries. And somewhere between silt and starlight, the hymn continues. Not in sound, but in stillness. Some truths do not ascend. They wait. And the sea, patient as eternity, keeps them safe until we remember how to listen again. They found it in fire. Not in a library, not in a tomb, but in the half-collapsed archives of a monastery built into the cliffs above the Aegean. The air there always smelled faintly of salt and smoke. Salt from the sea, smoke from centuries of candles that had never quite gone out. When the earthquake struck in 1928, one of the upper chambers gave way, spilling centuries of parchment into the open. Most were charred beyond rescue, their ink fused to black powder. But among them, one survived, or rather half-survived. It was a scroll of goat vellum, edges burned to lace. Across its center ran a map unlike any the archivists had seen. The lines were drawn not in ink, but in carbon. Ash pressed into the fibers, shimmering faintly under light. No landmarks were named, no compass rose, only winding lines like rivers or veins, connecting circles, spirals, and tiny symbols that resembled eyes. The abbot who found it kept it secret. He believed it to be a mnemes, a relic of remembrance, a map not of land but of time. He lingers near a statue of a woman holding a sphere. Her eyes are closed, her expression tranquil. In her arms, traces of mother-of-pearl shimmer faintly. The diver imagines her once placed at the entrance of a temple, the guardian of tides. In many mythologies, she would have been called Thalassa, Yam, or Namu, the mother who breathes through the sea. Here, she is nameless, but not forgotten. Decades later, it sits in a sealed vault in Athens. Scholars refer to it quietly as the Aegean palimpsest. Most believe it to be an esoteric cosmograph, drawn sometime in the 2nd century BCE, perhaps by followers of Heraclitus or the later Pythagoreans. But its mystery lies deeper. Radiocarbon analysis revealed that the charcoal used for the lines was not of local origin. Not pine, not olive, but cedar from Mount Lebanon, and mixed with traces of volcanic glass. Ash that had burned not once, but twice. Once in life, once in ritual. The pattern of circles, when rotated and overlaid upon modern bathymetric charts, seemed to trace the Mediterranean's ancient fault lines, from Crete to Santorini, from Thera to the vanished island some legends call Caliste. It was as if the cartographer had tried to draw not geography, but the movement of the Earth's own breath. A young researcher named Elias was the first to notice something else. When the map was viewed under red light, faint letters appeared between the lines, almost invisible to the naked eye. Greek, yes, but not quite. mixed with Phoenician curves older and softer. He traced the phrases carefully, each no longer than a heartbeat. Where water burned. Follow the sea that does not move. The sky remembers its own reflection. Each phrase felt more like a riddle than an instruction, yet taken together they suggested an origin that predated even the Greek world, a synthesis of traditions from before the Bronze Age collapse. Perhaps Minoan, or even Atlantean, as the wilder journals whispered. The diver's flashlight flickers. Pressure builds around him. For a heartbeat, the city seems to move, currents sliding through arches, light bending across walls, as if the water itself were breathing. Feels less like ruin, more like a body, sleeping, listening. He turns slowly in place, watching dust and plankton swirl like starlight. Elias did not believe in lost continents, but he did believe in the human desire to make sense of loss, to draw it into meaning. He took the map north to the volcanic islands near Naxiros, where local fishermen still tell stories of the ash winds, the days when the sea turns gray and the sky hangs heavy with dust that does not fall. The legend says that beneath those waters lie the remains of a library built not of stone, but of light, a place where the earth itself recorded its changes in luminous minerals, rewriting itself after every eruption. Standing on the cliffs above the caldera, Elias unrolled the map. The wind caught its edges and almost tore it from his hands. Beneath the trembling sky, the charcoal lines seemed to flicker, as though the fire that once made them still remembered its purpose. He traced the largest spiral with his finger. It matched the contours of the Thera caldera, the island that exploded in 1600 BCE and sent waves across the known world. That eruption is believed to have ended the Minoan Age, darkening skies as far away as Egypt and the Levant. Yet here, the spiral opened not into the sea, but into a hollow, a circle within the earth. He whispered the words inked faintly beside it. Follow the sea that does not move. In the following weeks, he followed the clues. Seismologists had recently identified a vast magma chamber beneath Naxiros, dormant but alive. Its pressure shifts matched the spirals on the map almost exactly. The symbols might not be mythical at all. They could be a form of geologic notation, describing not the shape of islands but the heartbeat of the planet itself. It dawned on him that whoever drew this map may have known the Earth as a living body, every volcano an organ, every fault line a pulse. It was not a map of direction but of respiration. He descended into the abandoned mine shafts that snake beneath the island, once used to extract sulfur for ancient medicine. The walls still steamed faintly, and crystalline sulfur glistened in the torchlight. At one junction, he found something that made him stop. A mural drawn in soot, a spiral identical to the one on the map, surrounded by tiny marks shaped like eyes. When he returns to the surface, night has fallen. The waves are calm, the air strangely warm. On the deck, he removes the shell from his pocket. It glows faintly in the moonlight, as if the ocean had left its mark inside. Later, when analyzed, the shell's nacre will reveal isotopic layers inconsistent with known marine species. Layers formed under pressure far deeper than where it was found. Someone, centuries ago, had seen the same pattern and left their echo here, in darkness. He took a photograph, but later, the image came out blurred, as if the air itself had moved between shutter and lens. Back in Athens, the map continued to resist certainty. Carbon dating placed its creation between 200 and 400 BCE, but the material was older, the vellum reused, overwritten with symbols foreign to that era. A true palimpsest. When infrared imaging revealed faint text beneath the charcoal, the room fell silent. The script was older still, cuneiform. A translation emerged slowly over months, rendered in fragments. When fire meets water, the gods erase and begin again. Those who remember the first shape draw the second in silence. Elias wrote in his notes, "This is not a map for travel. It is a map for mourning." Museums call it the Pearl Relic, an object of curiosity displayed behind glass. Visitors pass it without noticing, until the room grows still. Then, sometimes, a low hum can be heard. Not mechanical, not electronic, just faint and pulsing, like a tide trapped in the shell's spiral. There is something almost human in the idea of drawing loss into form. In 79 CE, when Vesuvius erupted, the Roman author Pliny the Younger described the ash falling as snow, yet darker than night. Centuries later, archaeologists at Herculaneum would find scrolls in the Villa of the Papyri, carbonized by that same ash, words preserved because they had burned. Destruction as memory's only faithful scribe. The map drawn in ashes seems to belong to that same paradox. A record that could only exist through ruin. To draw it, one had to destroy something first. Parchment would life. Fire was both the ink and the teacher. Elias never published his findings. In his final letter, found in his study after his disappearance in 1967, he wrote, "I think I understand now why they used ash, because only what has burned truly remembers its form. The rest of us are still drying in the sun." His notebooks end there. The map remains in the museum vault, sealed and unreadable, though the curators say that under certain lights it glows faintly. A dull, living ember trapped inside its own story. The diver no longer speaks publicly about the discovery. When pressed, he only says that the sea has places it keeps for itself. That some stories are not meant to be proved, only remembered. He dreams often of descending again, but the coordinates are gone. The currents have shifted. Even sonar finds nothing now, only sand, only light. Perhaps it was not meant to guide anyone anywhere. Perhaps it was an act of grief, the last effort of a people who watched their islands sink beneath the waves and chose to draw their memory in the very substance that destroyed them. A map made not to be followed, but to be listened to. And if one listens closely, they say, the ash still holds a whisper, a sound like surf meeting flame, a breath between water and fire, the quiet murmur of the world redrawing itself. When the lights in the museum flicker at night, guards sometimes hear a soft hiss from the vault, a sound like paper remembering what it once was. No one has opened it since. Perhaps the city folded itself deeper, beyond reach, beyond need. Perhaps the ocean remembers those who loved it enough to become silence. Some maps do not lead forward. They lead back into silence, to the moment before the world decided what shape it would take. And perhaps that is what all ashes are, the memory of form, the last warmth of what dared to exist. The map remains, a black spiral on pale skin, drawn not to be read, but to keep something alive in the dark. Somewhere, beneath the seabed or beneath our knowing, and when the wind moves across the surface, carrying that soft, rhythmic hush, it may not be wind at all, but the faint breath of a civilization that never truly vanished, only turned inward, where the world cannot touch it. The shape it describes still moves, slow, patient, eternal, a sea that does not move, and a fire that never fully dies. They first heard them at dusk, faint, metallic, and impossibly far below. The ship was anchored near Halong Bay, where the water turns to glass when the wind dies. The sound came softly, almost uncertainly, like the memory of a bell carried across centuries of tide. The crew dismissed it as chains moving in current. But the oceanographer aboard, Dr. Layla Armitage, knew the difference. The sound had rhythm. For notes, each fading like breath. Then silence. Then four again. It repeated every hour, though no machinery, no wreck, and no current could explain it. The waves keep their secrets well. Later, divers confirmed the impossible. Beneath 70 meters of calm green water, on a limestone shelf buried under coral, lay the remains of what appeared to be a monastery. A place once built for silence, now buried within it. The divers called it Chua Dui Bien, the temple below the sea. Its walls were carved directly into the stone, the arches curved with the grace of Vietnamese pagodas from the late Cham period. But what startled them most were the bells. Dozens of them, each larger than a man, resting upright on the seabed. They were arranged in concentric circles around a central courtyard. Their surfaces shimmered with algae, their lips kissed by fish, and when the tide shifted, they sang. Layla watched the footage in her cabin that night. The sound was low, haunting, and clear. a tone that seemed less like metal and more like memory vibrating through water. The bells were not struck by anything physical. The slight movement of current through their hollow cores was enough to create sound. Later analysis showed the bells were cast of an unusual bronze alloy mixed with traces of tin, manganese, and, unexpectedly, iron from meteorite fragments. This made them unusually resonant, able to produce vibration under the lightest flow. Someone, centuries ago, had designed them to speak to the sea. And beneath them, the city waits, not lost, only listening. Historical records mention nothing of such a monastery, but legends among the coastal fishing villages tell of an island once called Tan Phong, the island of pure sound. They say monks there practiced a ritual of drowned prayer, in which they submerged bells at the end of each season, believing the ocean would carry their songs to the spirits of the deep. The last mention of this island appears in a Cham Maritime chronicle from the 14th century, noting a temple devoted to the breathing sea that vanished after a storm, which sang for 7 nights. 7 nights, enough to erode a coastline, to pull a monastery back into the tide. Layla descended herself on the 3rd expedition. The sea was still that morning, and the surface rippled like mercury as she slipped beneath. At 20 meters, sunlight fractured into pale gold. At 40, green deepened to indigo. And then, slowly, the bells appeared, shadows resolving into forms, their shapes rising from the seabed like ancient lungs filled with silence. They stood on terraces carved into the limestone, each facing inward. Coral had woven itself into their mouths, creating delicate lattices of living sound. Small fish darted in and out like sparks from an unseen forge. When she brushed one of the bells, the vibration resonated not through her ears but through her chest. A deep, physical tone that felt like the echo of breathing. It pulsed through the water in waves, stirring dust into spirals. In that moment she understood the legend. These bells were not made to call humans to prayer. They were made to remind the sea to listen. Her samples confirmed the strangeness of the alloy. Its composition matched neither ancient Vietnamese nor Chinese metallurgy. Some isotopes traced back to ores in northern Laos, while others resembled materials used in Indian bell-casting traditions from Kerala and Kalinga during the 12th century. Moonlight rests upon a shoreline that no longer knows the sea. A pale crust gleams where waves once breathed. A glittering skin of salt stretched to the horizon like frost that never melts. Wind combs it into ripples and shattered mirrors, and at the meeting point of dunes and this silent brightness, a gate stands alone. It is not grand. 2 uprights of stone packed with crystals, a lintel streaked white, grains of halite fused in the seams as if the tide had licked them and stepped back. No wall encloses it, no city follows after. The door faces only emptiness and sky, the wide desert humming with a heat that lingers even after dark. Those who came here before have left little more than footnotes. A sketch in the worn notebook of a French surveyor in 1889 who wrote of Unport Dunsel Petrify, Tourney vers Orion. A line in the itinerary of a caravan master from Gadams mentioning the threshold of brightness at the edge of a vanished lagoon. A blurred photograph labeled in pencil, shot possible gate. The old map places it near the dry heart of North Africa, not far from the salt flats of Shat el Jared where mirages grow like cities at noon and dissolve by dusk. It was as if this monastery had drawn knowledge from every edge of the Indian Ocean, a confluence of pilgrims, monks, and metallurgists. There is precedent for such convergence. Inscriptions found in the ruins of my son, a Cham sanctuary complex, refer to the travelers who sang the metal awake, possibly describing itinerant artisans who cast temple bells while reciting mantras. In Sri Lanka, the ancient chronicle Mahavamsa tells of bells that sang beneath the sea, gifted by visiting monks from the east. Perhaps this underwater temple was one of their experiments, a collaboration between faiths, an attempt to merge prayer with element. As the weeks passed, the team grew accustomed to the bells' soft voices. The tones shifted with the tides, higher when the current rushed in from the south, lower when it ebbed toward the Gulf of Tonkin. Each phase of the moon brought new harmonics. Some sounded mournful, others radiant. A Acoustic analysis showed that the bells produced frequencies matching the human heart rate at rest, between 55 and 65 beats per minute. The ocean, moving through them, had become a metronome for calm. Layla would lie awake in her bunk each night, headphones on, listening to the recordings. They made her feel suspended between worlds. Not asleep, not awake, drifting like one of the bells in its cradle of salt. She began to dream in rhythm, the slow inhalation of waves, the exhalation of bronze. A solitary monk walks there now, long after the caravans have left these routes for engines and asphalt. His sandals make a soft sound on the crust, as though he were crossing a thin layer of snow. He stops before the gate and rests his palm on the cool salt-streaked stone. The surface is rough but strangely tender, a mineral skin made from countless evaporations. This shore once belonged to an inland sea that fed on rivers in a greener age. Its waters withdrew over centuries, leaving behind a ledger of light. Geologists speak of basins that bloom and vanish with climate and tilt, of lacustrine beds laid down in sun and wind. Travelers speak of thirst and the taste of the air on one's lips when the wind rises from the flats. Every breath salted, every word crystallizing at the edge of the tongue. In her final report to UNESCO, she wrote cautiously, "The architecture appears designed not for durability but for resonance. Walls curve to amplify sound, columns hollow to carry echo. Even the floor tiles, when struck, produce harmonic tones that correspond to the bells. This temple was not built to be seen. It was built to be heard." Her proposal to preserve the site was approved, but funding never came. Political tides changed, storms returned, and within years, sand and coral began reclaiming the bells once more. The coordinates were lost in a storm, the ship's data corrupted. Only fragments of recordings remain. Low hums, shifting tones, an occasional clear chime that seems to call out a name no one knows. Today, local fishermen still speak of the sound. On windless nights, when the sea lies smooth as silk, they say the bells rise through the deep and echo across the bay. The monk has come because of a rumor that the gate aligns with stars. He heard it from a librarian in Tozeur who had catalogued the surveyor's notebook and noticed a small diagram scrawled in the margin. 3 points like a belt, a diagonal line, a gate sketched beneath. Naphtali far to the east has its ancient stones that point to the sky. 5th millennium before our era. Cattle herders watching Orion and Sirius across a lake that has long since gone to dust. Petra to the north holds its facades chiseled into rose cliffs, doorways that frame pieces of sun. Here there is neither circle nor facade, only a narrow threshold built of salt and stone, facing a wind that smells of old oceans and distant myrtle. He stands inside the frame and watches the night deepen. The vault above him brightens with the slow bloom of constellations, each star a grain among the billions, and in the gate's narrow geometry the sky seems closer, more personal, as if the desert had made a small room for looking. They call it Tieng Tho Qua Bien, the breath of the sea. Marine geologists insist it's the movement of internal waves along thermoclines, temperature layers vibrating like glass sheets. But the villagers shake their heads. They say the sea remembers its monks. Some even claim that when the bells sound, fish gather near the surface, as if listening. There's a poem carved on a small stone slab recovered from the site, now held in Hanoi's Maritime Museum. The inscription is faint, eroded by time, but still legible. When we ring the silence, the ocean breathes. When the tide sleeps, the world begins again. Scholars date it to the 13th century. Wind scuds across the flats and carves powder into crescent shapes. The monk traces with his finger the faint chisel marks that climb the uprights, short, steady lines like breaths counted in prayer. He follows them to the top and finds, not letters, but incisions in pairs and trios that echo a familiar pattern. Orion's belt, the triangular suggestion of Sirius low to the horizon. A dotted curve that could be the path of Venus across a season. In the world of deserts and caravans, stars are more than ornaments. They are instruments of mercy. The incense route once braided from Arabia through the wastes, Nabatean stewards guiding traders by wells mapped to the sky. On the Roman Via Salaria, bricks of salt moved like a quiet currency to the capital. In the salt towns of Tagaza and Tadeni, slabs were quarried from the earth like frozen dawn and borne on camelback to nourish cities far away. Civilizations have long trusted salt to keep what would otherwise spoil. They have trusted stars to keep what would otherwise be lost. This gate seems to have married the two. A preservative for memory, a frame for the heavens. But the tone of it, simple, circular, infinite, could belong to any age. Years later, Layla returned one last time. Older now, her hair streaked with gray. The site had changed. Coral had overtaken the bells. Fish had made them home. She descended in silence, no camera, no instrument. Just her and the water. As she floated above the temple, she reached out and touched the nearest bell. The vibration rose again. Softer this time, slower, almost weary. Pulsed once, twice, then faded into stillness. She closed her eyes and let the sound move through her, into her lungs, her bones, her pulse. For a moment, she could not tell where her body ended and the water began. When she surfaced, the horizon glowed with dusk, a color halfway between copper and memory. The bells never rang again after that. Perhaps the coral sealed them, or perhaps the sea decided to rest. But some nights, if you walk along that coast with the tide low and the wind still, you might hear a tone rising faintly through the waves. Not loud, not clear, but enough to still the heart. He kneels and presses his ear to the lintel. Salt is brittle, but it carries a peculiar silence, a rich stillness like the pause in a chant. In the moon's pallor he sees, inside the thickness of the stone, small pockets where brine once lived, trapped and evaporated dozens of times. There are places on Earth where salt becomes architecture. The cathedral-like galleries of Wieliczka near Krakow, where chapels are carved for mineral night. The glittering caves on Keshem Island in the Persian Gulf, where the earth bleeds halite into glassy ribs. The white terraces along the Dead Sea where crystalline feathers cling to reeds and stones. This gate shares their modest miracle. Water learning to hold its shape as memory. A vanished shore sets itself into an object and asks to be remembered. It is said that those who hear it will dream of slow rivers, of breath and bronze, of temples made for sound alone. And when they wake, they will remember something they cannot name. Only that the world, once, had music hidden beneath its silence. The ocean keeps those bells now, not as relics but as lungs. And perhaps every wave that touches shore, every hush that fills the night between tides, is their echo, a low reminder that not all prayers are spoken. Some are simply breathed, and some, like the bells beneath the tides, he sets a small lamp on the ground and lets the flame shrink to a breath. Shadows lengthen. The surface of the gate brightens where crystals catch the light in a soft scatter, not a glare. On the eastern upright, he notices a different set of marks. Long, shallow grooves etched like rays toward the place where the sun would rise at midwinter. The line is not perfect. It wavers as if carved by hands that trembled with age or reverence. He thinks of the old calendars in stone, the solstice corridors at Newgrange where light spills like a benediction only once each year, the shafts in the Great Pyramid that point toward particular stars as if to give the pharaoh a path. Here, too, someone once meant to hold a mourning. The gate faces not the sea that was, but the sky that returns. Never stop. Moon hides and the sea answers. On some coasts that is merely poetry. Out here, beyond charts crowded with shipping lanes and weather arrows, it feels like a rule. A man at the wheel watches the full moon lift, pale as chalk, and the horizon shifts with it. A thin bright seam trembling between dark water and darker sky. He has come because of a rumor older than most maps. An island that appears when the moon is round, moves with the tides, and is gone by dawn. Sailors have named such places before. On medieval Portolan charts, a small circle west of Ireland is labeled High Brazil, drawn as a perfect ring with a bar across its center, as if a lake lay in its heart. The Catalan Atlas of 1375 shows it. So does a Venetian chart from 1436. Irish fishermen swore it rose from the haze once every 7 years, sparkling like hammered metal. Far south and east, another phantom, Antillia, haunted the Atlantic on 15th century plans, more hope than land. Near Sicily, in 1831, a true island burst from the sea, Ferdinandia, born of volcanic ash and fire, christened by navies, claimed by flags, then swallowed again within a year, leaving only a shoal and the memory of warm pumice underfoot. In the Coral Sea, for more than a century, Sandy Island floated on maps like a smudge of hesitation until an Australian research vessel crossed its coordinates in 2012 and found nothing but deep water. The world forgets so slowly. The sea sometimes forgets at once. The man carries a copy of a chart drawn in 1325 by Angelino Dell'Orto, its vellum browned by hands that believed distance could be tamed with ink. Beside it lies a Royal Navy log from 1870 mentioning a circular haze west by south, impossible to fix. Between the two is a note from a lighthouse keeper on Achill, written in a tight, patient hand. On the full of the moon, a low country rises, not cloud. I heard birds. Perhaps it was mirage. Perhaps it was wish. He has come to listen to the place where these voices overlap. Night opens like a shell. The sea lies calm, a dark plate flecked with the pale sparks of plankton. Far to port, a faint bank of fog shifts and then holds still, as if pinned to one place on the horizon. The moon climbs and the fog brightens from within. In that dull glow, a line appears, not cloud, not wave. Something long and low, the color of wetted slate, drifting with the tide yet keeping its shape. He cuts the engine. Sound collapses into hush. A gull's cry far away, the small tink of rigging. He raises binoculars. The shape is nearer than he thought and larger, with edges that breathe. A smell reaches him, clean, mineral, like rain on stone. The surface between them thickens, not with water, but with something that rides it. Pumice, perhaps, a raft of pale, porous rock such as storms have carried from volcanoes in the Kermadec and Tonga, traveling thousands of miles like wandering continents. After the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa, sailors wrote of such rafts. Acres of stone that sounded like hail on a roof when the hull pushed through. In 2012, satellite images watched a new pumice sea drift from the submarine eruption at Havre, white as milk in moonlight, bearing barnacles and small crabs like passengers on a ship with no destination. Islands can move when they are less island than dream of stone. Yet what lies ahead is more than pumice. It rises and falls with a rhythm slower than waves, almost like breathing. He lowers a small boat and rows toward it, oars ghosting through water that grows suddenly silky. Slicks formed by internal waves, perhaps, those hidden tides that move along layers of temperature beneath the surface, revealing themselves at night as long dark bands. The air is cooler here. When the fog thins, he sees ground. A wide skin of shingled stones, pale and soft under the moon. Each rock no heavier than a leaf in the hand, each a bubble frozen into shape. They knit into a surface that bears his weight lightly. He steps onto it and the whole plane shifts a fraction, answering the tide. The island is not anchored. It is a long-held breath. He walks carefully. Underfoot, the pumice sings in a faint dry voice, a collection of small chimes. Here and there, cracks open to show water breathing under the raft, black, star-marked, patient. There are birds, too. Not many, but enough to convince him this place has been here more than once. A petrel schemes the edge, turns and returns, disliking his lamp but not leaving. Seaweed clings in strands along the raft's rim, as if this moving shore had brushed against kelp forests somewhere far away and kept a little of their color. He rests on a stone that weighs less than it seems. The moonlight finds every pore, every tiny cave. A memory rises. The Uros people of Lake Titicaca building their floating islands from layers of Tadora reeds. Their homes moored and renewed, drifting but sure. Far north, in the Bay of Fundy, the sea drains and returns in a script written by the moon's 18.6-year nodal cycle. Its long pulse governing tides that lift and lower whole harbors as if turning a page. On the Mont Saint-Michel coast, roads appear at low tide and vanish at high. Pilgrims learn the calendar of water by the soles of their feet. In the Ganges-Brahmaputra delta, the chars, islands of silt, are born, walk with the monsoon, and die in silence. We like land that holds still. The world likes to move. He looks east, where the moon's path has laid a bright channel on the sea. The raft leans slightly toward that light, as if following. Under the low hiss of the ocean he hears a deep slow knock. Not sound, exactly, but a pressure. The oar he has laid beside him vibrates in sympathy. Tidal resonance does this sometimes in narrow seas, the Bay of Biscay exhaling a tone of its own. But there are no narrows here, just open Atlantic and a shelf that drops away into something old and unmeasured. He thinks of Hy Brasil's ring on the maps, a circle around a void, a shore surrounding stillness. Perhaps the cartographers were not drawing land at all. Perhaps they were recording a phenomenon. A place where the sea thickens into memory under the full moon and behaves, for a night, like ground. A scrap of parchment found in a nearby con tells part of a story. A scribe from the Hafsid court passing through in the 14th century wrote of a threshold of the saltless sea, where men gathered once each year to watch the longest night turn itself toward dawn. He describes bowls of water set upon the ground to mirror starlight, and a prayer made without words, the kind one makes with the whole body, standing very still while one's breath keeps time. The scribe notes that the gate is older than all who approach it, and that no tribe claims it. It belongs to the desert as a well does, to be used and not owned. In the log he brought, a whaler in 1684 wrote briefly, "We stood WSW from Inishbofin and came upon a field of white stones, floating, the sea under it black as tar, smell of brimstone, heard as of cattle lowing far below us, but it was the sea." Another note later, "No sign of anything in that bearing at noon. People tell truth when it has no audience. Later, when audience arrives, truth folds its wings." He walks until the raft narrows and begins to braid into separate tongues, each finger reaching toward moonlight. Between them, the water is very clear, the stars doubling themselves in its skin. He kneels and puts his hand into it. Cold climbs his arm like a spell. When he lifts his hand, droplets burn with phosphorus, green-white, soft as breath. He remembers floating in tropical water once, stirring a halo of fire that was only life in small units, a light because the sea had been dark too long. Here, the glow is paler, older, as if the ocean were remembering a language it used to speak to the moon. The raft moves, not fast, not in a way anyone would call travel, but enough that his footprints slowly forget themselves. On the horizon, a faint black tooth rises and sinks, perhaps a remnant of volcanic cone, like Graham Island's drowned remnant near Sicily. A shoal the Italians call Banco Graham and British charts mark as Ferdinandia, submerged. There are islands that come with wars and leave with weather. There are islands that exist only in drawings and wish. There are islands like this which are not islands at all, and yet touch the soul like one. A place where the body says, "Yes, I am on land," while the heart knows the heart is at sea. He thinks of mirage, the high refractions called Fata Morgana that lift coasts into the sky and drape cliffs where none exist. In polar seas, ships have chased cities made of air. But he can pick up this land in his hands. He can crumble it and watch it float. A gull lands a few yards away, tilts its head, and walks without sinking. Life does not argue with what bears it. He takes out a small compass and watches the needle's slow, indecisive dance. There is iron in pumice sometimes, iron in the seawater, iron tugged by the moon's field, small and weak but present. He sets the compass on the stone and sets beside it a pocket watch that ticks like a tiny anchor. On nights like this, clocks seem unnecessary. The world runs on the older time, the long slow inhale of the tide, the nodal breathing that changes high water a finger's width each year, the precessions that move stars and decide solstices. If the moon were nearer, we would all hear time differently. Perhaps we already do and have forgotten to listen. From the raft's inner places another smell rises. Less clean now, faintly sulphurous. Not dangerous, only honest. He remembers that floating pumice rafts often carry the signature of their birth for years, a memory of the vent beneath the sea that threw them into light. The island's surface is broken here by a line of darker stones fused to glass. He follows it like a path and finds at its end a pocket where water is warmer by a degree. Heat travels strangely in the ocean. Internal tides carry it along invisible corridors. He lies down and puts his ear to the porous floor. The raft hums, or he does. In either case, something is content. He speaks aloud because there is no one to hear. "You move with the moon," he says, and the raft answers by not answering, by shifting as a whole with a sigh that does not come from wind. He thinks of the reed islands of Titicaca again, renewed by hand when they thin. Who renews this? Volcanoes, surely mothers of continents. Or currents, those long patient hands that build and unbuild shores, that placed the Sargasso Sea in the North Atlantic like a green sleeping room and taught ships to fear calm more than storm. Perhaps the island he walks is older than his grandfather's grandfather, stitched by many births of stone and many winters of breaking, wandering like a monk in prayer around an invisible cloister. He sits. The moon goes higher, and with it the tide climbs the raft's edge, slips through, lifts the whole by a whisper. In a notebook he writes 3 lines. High Brazil, ring and bar. Ferdinandia, ash and flags. Sandy Island, erased by soundings, surviving in the mind. Below the lines he writes another thought and underlines it twice. Land that moves. Near dawn the raft thins. The stones still float but less willingly, as if their decision is changing. The water brightens with the first idea of day. Birds call from nowhere. A long low swell runs through the raft from east to west, and every stone lifts and falls in a single slow breath. He stands and begins to walk back toward the boat. Though there is no hurry, the path erases behind him kindly. On the last wider tongue he stops and looks back. The island looks like a continent now only because perspective is a generous artist. In an hour it will be a seam. By noon it will be a rumor in a log, the sea stitching its face smooth again. He reaches the skiff and lets himself drift beside the raft's edge. Small sea snails have already colonized its underbelly, tiny temples with spiral roofs. He touches one with a fingertip and feels it pull in, waiting. The moon begins to lower, pale with daylight, and the raft's attention goes with it. The tide slides seaward, soft as a sleeve. The pumice loosens, breaks into flocks, then into separate stones, then into single floating thoughts. The monk remains within the frame as Orion climbs. In the small width of that doorway the stars seem to pass in procession. He lifts the lamp and studies the lintel from below. Embedded in it are 2 smooth stones unlike the surrounding matrix, a pale gypsum oval and a darker basalt chip. The oval catches the lamp like a captured moon. The basalt drinks the light and gives none back. They sit side by side, night and day paired without argument. He thinks of ancient diorites placed in Akkadian temples to anchor contracts, of ritual couples in Sabaean shrines, of Janus looking forward and back above Roman thresholds. A gate is a grammar of direction. Perhaps these 2 stones are simply a maker's whim. Or perhaps they mean to teach that every entry is also a leaving. The Dead Sea that left its salts, the sky that enters where water went away. He rows back to the ship and climbs aboard. The deck feels crude, a hard translation of what he has been standing on. He turns the bow for home and moves at the slow speed the sea tolerates in men who have listened. When he checks the chart, there is of course no mark to add, nothing a surveyor would trust. He writes anyway in the margin. An island that kept time with the moon, entered on full sea, left with dawn. Weeks later, when he tells the story in a bar where old hands lean close and pretend indifference, one of them nods and says, "Hi Brazil," and another says, "No lad, that's only fog," and a third says nothing at all, only drinks and looks at the door as if the door might swing open on salt air. A museum will never want the pumice stone he pockets. Though under lamplight at night, it glows a little with the phosphorescence caught in its pores. He sets it near his bed and sometimes, lying awake, he can smell again that clean mineral breath and hear that low nowhere knock under the raft, the long patience of water agreeing with the moon. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was meant to be stepped on gently by those whose feet remember coasts that move and names that do not help. Some places are doors without frames. Some lands hold only long enough to ask you a question and then slip back into the larger body they were borrowed from. Years later, a storm will drive him south toward the Azores. And for an hour at dusk a high black line will rise on the horizon and fade, and he will not follow it. He will turn instead for harbor because he has already learned the answer the sea gives to those who demand certainty. On his shelf the pumice gathers dust like snow. When the moon is full, it feels heavier in the hand and then lighter, an echo of tides passing through what should not know tide at all. The island moved with the moon. It will again. And when, on some winter night, waves begin to speak in a slower voice against a distant shore, someone will walk out under a white coin of sky and see a line where the world looks thicker, and they will go to it, and their steps will leave them, and they will learn the old lesson that water has taught since before we named it. That every solid thing is only a kind of listening, and every map is a hope, and some countries exist for a few hours only so that the heart will remember how to follow. Something it cannot keep. They found it where the desert begins to breathe. Not in the shifting dunes that wander like thought, but farther north, where stone remembers the shape of air. A single gate, carved into the cliff face, facing an empty horizon that has not changed in 5,000 years. The Bedouin call it Bab al-Rih al-Mansiya, the gate of the forgotten wind. It stands half-buried in ochre sand, its arch so precise it still holds the line of an invisible symmetry. The keystone bears no god, no emblem, only a swirl. A spiral etched so faintly it could be mistaken for the mark of wind itself. There is an old story from a village near the Dead Sea that the monk once heard in a house where grapes hung in twilight and a worn Bible lay without dust on a shelf. A woman named after Lot's wife spoke of columns of crystallized salt along the water's edge. The locals call one of them the Watchful Mother. In the story she told, people who have been turned to salt do not become mere statues. They become guardians of memory, preserving the taste of a moment until someone with the right kind of listening passes by. Looking through the gate tonight, the monk feels a similar charge. Not a haunting, but a keeping. Archaeologists first noted the structure during aerial surveys of the Arabian Peninsula in the 1970s. From above, the gate appears almost ceremonial, a doorway without a wall. But local legends claim there once stood an entire city behind it. Alkamar, the city of whispering stones, a place built to listen to the wind. The first expedition to reach it in modern times arrived in 1989, led by Dr. Hassan Idrisi, a historian of lost trade routes. His journals describe the approach. For 3 days we walked through silence, not absence of sound, but the kind of stillness that feels inhabited, as if something waits to speak, yet chooses not to. On the morning of the 4th day, they saw it, the gate rising from sand like a fossil of architecture. 2 monolithic pillars of sandstone, weathered but unbroken, joined by a lintel of black basalt streaked with quartz. The composition itself was impossible. The basalt could not have come from this region. The nearest known deposit lay nearly 300 kilometers to the west, across mountain and wadi. Someone long ago had carried it here stone by stone to build a door that led nowhere. Hassan's team excavated carefully. What they uncovered changed shape with every gust. Beneath the gate lay slabs of flagstone aligned in concentric circles. Around them, fragments of pottery etched with rhythmic patterns, curves and spirals repeating like the memory of breath. No human figures, no beasts, no deities. Only wind translated into design. Wind had been worshipped before. In Mesopotamia, the god Enlil was called the Lord of Air, the invisible architect who shaped dust into form. He crouches and gathers a few crystals fallen at the base, no bigger than barley. He places them on his tongue and lets them melt. The taste is not harsh, not like seawater. It is gentle, like a story told by someone who has carried it a long time. He watches the arc of the Milky Way slide through the door and notices that the lower right of the frame bears faint star scratches shaped like a horn. Taurus, perhaps, rising ahead of spring. Naphtah's people laid stones to greet such risings when cattle were wealth and rain a kind of visitation. The monk exhales and feels, for a moment, how the breath meets the night and disappears into it as naturally as a river empties into a lake. In Egypt, Shu held the space between earth and sky. In the deserts of Arabia, long before Islam, tribes offered incense to Rih al-Hayat, the breath of life, believed to move through all things unseen. Perhaps this gate belonged to those who honored that breath not as myth, but as measure. One night, a sandstorm came without warning. The team took shelter behind the pillars, pressing close to the stone. Hassan later wrote that as the wind screamed through the archway, it did not deafen. It sang. The sound was harmonic, resonant, like a flute carved from the desert itself. When measured later, the gate's dimensions matched the acoustical ratios of certain Sumerian temples known to amplify chant. The arch had been tuned, its curvature crafted to create resonance when wind crossed it at specific speeds. They were not builders of walls. They were builders of echo. After the storm, Hassan found new inscriptions exposed by the scouring wind. They ran along the base of the gate, faint and half-erased. Transliteration was difficult, but 2 lines could be read. He who listens becomes the path. He remembers a passage in Charles Doughty's Wandering Prose, the desert rendered in syllables that drag their shadows. The nomad is a man of the air. He thinks of Gertrude Bell riding across basalt and chalk, measuring ruin and horizon with the same frank gaze. He thinks of Sir Richard Burton floating in the stinging, buoyant cradle of the Dead Sea and writing that a man cannot sink there. Their words are travel, and travel is a way of seeking one's original silence, the place before names. This gate, humble as it is, seems made for the same kind of seeking. It opens not to a city but to a posture. The voice that leaves returns in another season. At first he thought it poetic, but his assistant, a young epigrapher named Layla, noticed something peculiar. The script alternated between right to left and left to right lines, forming a mirrored sequence. The gate, it seemed, was also a text, a palindrome of stone. That symmetry recurred everywhere. Beneath the sand, they discovered the remnants of a courtyard shaped like a spiral, opening outward toward the horizon. At each turn, shallow recesses once held clay vessels. When the wind blew through them, the sound shifted pitch, low near the center, high at the edge, forming an ascending scale. The city of Alkamar, if it existed at all, might have been less a city than an instrument. The excavation ended abruptly that same year. The wind returned, fiercer than before. Tents tore, instruments vanished into dunes, and the air turned opaque. When it cleared, the site had changed. The spiral courtyard was gone, filled completely by sand. Only the gate remained. Hassan's final note reads simply, "We came seeking ruins. We found a presence." Sometime after midnight, a thin blush appears along the eastern rim of the world. The monk steps back from the threshold and looks toward the faint wedge of coming light. The wind has stilled. A few small creatures move in the salt's cool surface, leaving tracks that will erase themselves the moment sun returns. He sets the lamp aside and waits, the way a reader waits at the end of a line. In the pale approach of dawn, Orion leans toward the horizon, and the belt sinks into the gate as if into water. For an instant, the lintel and the sky share a geometry that makes neither dominant, a meeting of patience and amplitude. He returned to Riyadh and never went back. He died in 2003, leaving behind a trunk of field notes and a single cassette tape labeled The Gate, 2:17 a.m. When the recording was played years later at a conference, the audience fell silent. No voice, no static, only a deep tone. Steady, measured, faintly rising and falling like breath. Acoustic experts concluded it was natural resonance, air moving through a confined space. Yet the sound was too regular, too deliberate, like the slow inhalation of a sleeping world. Today, satellite imaging shows the gate still standing, though half swallowed by the dunes. A single dot of geometry in an ocean of motion. Wind speeds in the region follow strange rhythms, gusts that recur every 28 days, synchronized with lunar cycles. Climatologists call it coincidence. The Bedouin call it remembrance. They say that when the moon is brightest, the gate begins to hum. Not loudly, not for long, just enough for the camels to raise their heads and for the desert itself to tremble slightly, as if remembering the first wind that ever crossed it. In 2019, a small team from King Saud University revisited the site using ground-penetrating radar. Beneath the gate, 3 meters below the surface, they detected a void roughly circular in shape. They lowered a camera through a narrow borehole and found a chamber lined with smooth stone. At its center lay an oblong object that looked, impossibly, like an Aeolian harp, a frame strung with threads of bronze and gut, perfectly preserved. When the air entered through the borehole, it vibrated. What was this place in its beginning? A boundary marker for caravans, a shrine where the year turned, a vantage point for a herder keeping vigil by a receding lake. Perhaps the builders pressed brine-soaked stones into molds, dried them under a sky bleached of cloud, and fitted them with care. Perhaps they sang while working, a low song to keep the rhythm honest. Perhaps they stood beneath it, as he does now, and laid their foreheads against the crystal-scored pillar until their breath slowed and matched the world's wider pulse. Perhaps they taught their children how to stand in it and point out the names of the lights, Alnatak, Alnalam, Mintaka, so that even when the lake was a story and the caravans only a rumor, the habit of looking would remain. A single note filled the headphones, the same tone from Hassan's recording, a pitch near 440 hertz. The tuning of the human voice. If the harp was authentic, it would rewrite parts of musical history. The oldest known stringed instruments found in UR date to 2500 BCE. This harp, buried beneath a Neolithic gate, would predate them by millennia. Yet carbon dating of the surrounding strata yielded an age of roughly 3100 BCE, the dawn of written language, the twilight of prehistory. It means, perhaps, that the first music on Earth was made not by human hands, but by wind, and that these ancient builders learned to shape it. At night, the desert near the gate remains unnaturally calm. Travelers report that when the wind finally returns, it carries whispers, fragments of words that sound like half-remembered names. Acousticians explain it as pareidolia, the human brain seeking pattern in chaos. But it is difficult not to wonder. The first line of sun touches the flats, and the gate wakes like a lantern. Each crystal ceiling in night gives back dawn in soft fragments. The monk withdraws to the edge of the salt and sits. A jackal lifts its head in the distance and considers him, then decides against curiosity and vanishes between dunes. Heat will come soon and make butter out of time. The monk rests his hands in his lap as a pilgrim would and lets the scene pour through him without argument. The gate faces due west, where the sun dies each evening in a curtain of gold. Perhaps it was built as a memorial, not to a god, but to a silence so vast it could only be addressed through sound. Somewhere in the space between physics and faith lies that ancient purpose, to give the invisible a body. No one guards the gate of the forgotten wind now. It stands alone, flanked by shifting dunes that erase their own footprints by morning. When the air moves through it, the sand dances in rings, small vortices that shimmer for seconds, then fall flat again. It is said that if you stand before the gate and speak a word, the wind will carry it away, fold it, and return it in another form. Some claim to have heard their own names whispered back in tones of dust. Others say the gate never repeats, only transforms, turning each sound into another fragment of its endless song. Perhaps it is not a monument at all, but a mouth, a way for the world itself to breathe. As night descends, the temperature drops sharply. The sand releases the day's stored heat with a sigh. Stars arrive one by one, not burning, but observing. The wind stirs again, tracing its fingers along the basalt lintel. The gate hums, just enough to tremble the air. No one will write a report that satisfies skeptics. Measurements can be made, the azimuth of the uprights, the seasonal angle of the belts rising, the solstitial groove on the eastern stone. But the thing that matters will remain only partly visible, a pearl buried in brine. The desert is charitable in that way. It gives enough to nourish, never so much that certainty forgets to bow. What history there is will be a lace of guesses. Hafsid scribe, French surveyor, Nabatean echo, a monk in sandals watching winter pass overhead while a dead sea remembers itself in salt. For a moment, the desert feels like an organ of sound, each dune a chamber, each grain of sand a note. Then silence returns. Somewhere, far beyond, a new gust gathers. It will cross the Red Sea, touch the ruins of Marib, pass through the broken arches of Petra, then arrive again at this place. Older, softer, carrying the echoes of its own past journey. When it does, the gate will open again, not to another world, but to another listening. Because the wind, like memory, never truly forgets. It only waits for shape, a passage, an arch, a name whispered across centuries of dust. And through that shape, it breathes us all into being again. Some voices belong to the earth itself. The gate of the forgotten wind is one of them. Moonlight lays a thin skin over the bay and everything beneath it seems to breathe. The water is clear enough that on a calm night, from a small boat drifting off the Campanian coast, you can see patterns not made by tide or fish, straight lines, dark angles, white tesserae glimmering like a fallen constellation. Columns sleep there, their capitals dressed in algae. Garden walls wander under the surface with a confidence that belongs to land. You are looking down at streets that once heard the sandals of senators and the laughter of emperors. The Romans called this shore Baiae, a pleasure ground braided with villas and bathhouses. The earth beneath it is alive, and over centuries it has lifted and lowered like a slow-breathing chest. That is why the city learned two languages: sunlight and salt. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was meant to be stumbled upon by those who have exhausted louder thresholds and are ready for a door that opens nowhere and everywhere at once. The monk stands and places his palm once more on the crystal-sewn pillar. The surface is warming. He whispers nothing to it and hears nothing in return, and this mutual restraint feels like a vow. They called the trembling here Braticism, the long rising and falling of ground as magma shifts in the deep. In nearby Pozzuoli, 3 columns stand in the ruin we misname the Temple of Serapis. They are a clock written in stone. Halfway up their shafts, bands of small holes bite into the marble, the work of lithophagous mollusks that bore only when the columns stood in seawater. The rock remembers the tide's long moods more faithfully than any chronicle. Submergence, emergence, a return to air. Baiae, stretched along the same volcanic field, had the same fate. Villas slid beneath a moving shoreline. Mosaic floors found themselves visited by fish. A statue of a sleeping nymph learned the weight of waves. A man leans over the boat's gunwale with a mask and a small lamp in his hand. He has read the old sources: Seneca's Cool Philosophy, Pliny's Catalogue of Marvels, Suetonius' Gossip, and the newer reports. The underwater archaeological park, Parco Sommerso di Baia, mapped by divers and sonar, mosaics of black and white, opus reticulatum walls, the remains of Portus Julius, where Agrippa trained Rome's fleet in the clipped, efficient years of 37 BCE. He knows there is another Rome under the water, quieter and no less grand, and he has come not to conquer it with measurements but to let it speak. He slips into the bay at twilight. Sound muffles into a soft chamber, and the lamp opens a narrow world. The first thing he sees is a floor. Small marble tiles set in a pattern of diamonds and stars. A triclinium once stood here, couches around a low table, a room for eating where conversation would have braided with steam rising from the baths. Now a wrasse flicks its tail over the star points and the pattern returns to silence. The lamp glances off a threshold. He passes through. Ahead, a wall leans, its bricks laid in the neat diagonal net Roman engineers loved. An arch still holds, though the mortar has grown soft enough to crumble under a thumb. Every surface is filmed with life: brown, green, a thin pale fuzz like breath on glass. In the beam's edge, something waits. When the light pauses, it resolves into a face. The statue lies half buried on its side, eyes closed, lips parted. Claudius Nymphaeum, the report said, contained a small theater of marble, Ulysses and his companions offering a wineskin to the Cyclops. Some of those figures were raised and set in a museum, but others remained. A sea garden does not give up all its guests at once. The man floats, watching bubbles hang for a second and then decide to rise. The statue looks asleep in a way the living rarely achieve. He moves on. Farther out, blocks and paving stones outline a courtyard. In its center, a low basin yawns, perhaps once a fish pond. The Romans loved piscini at the margin of sea and house, mixing salt and fresh water with small sluices, cultivating mullet and eels as if curating a private tide. Here the basin holds only shadow. He remembers that Pliny wrote of Baiae as a place where luxury went to study new forms of itself. He also wrote, almost tenderly, of hot springs and the way the bay made a shelter for the body's weariness. Heat still moves in these depths. Along some stones a delicate white fur builds where minerals precipitate, a lace the water makes when it is thinking of being steam. The earth is speaking here through the old Roman grammar. Portus Julius lies just beyond, the harbor Agrippa created by cutting channels to join Lake Avernus and Lake Lucrinus to the sea, a hidden mouth where ships could be trained unseen. The channels remain as darker corridors through lighter sand. Avernus was a round, quiet mirror in the woods. The ancients thought it the door to the underworld. The man has walked its modern rim, where sulfur sometimes perfumes the air and cormorants draw their wet crosses on the water. Out here, beneath the boat, the idea of an underworld feels practical. A city in the afterlife of seawater, a harbor remembered by fish. He turns and the lamp touches another floor, this one an image. Delicate black tesserae sketch sea creatures around a central medallion. A dolphin leaps among vine scrolls. Near it, an inscription is almost legible before the silt blurs it. A name or a blessing, a sound once made in a friend's direction. He reaches out, then stops. Touch here is an argument. Sometimes it is better to let the place keep its breath. There is thunder in the rock miles inland. The whole Campi Flegrei caldera has its moods, and geologists watch the swelling ground with clinical affection. In 1538 the earth heaved and split and a new hill, Monte Nuovo, rose in a week from farmland. A myth compressed into 7 days, complete with smoke and ash. The shoreline jumped. Part of the old Roman coast went dry, part sank deeper. An earthquake is a door the planet opens and closes with a speed that embarrasses clocks. The sea does its work afterward, slower and kinder, a long smoothing, a folding. That is why Baiae looks less ruined than translated. He glides down a corridor and out into a street where low walls mark property lines. Here and there a column stands like a candle. He imagines lanterns in niches, sandals on wet stone, steam lifting from shoulders as people drift from caldarium to tepidarium to frigidarium, mouths telling stories of law and love in the echoing marble while outside the bay held its blue mirror to the sky. When the ground sank by degrees, the sea would have arrived in the same rooms. First shy, a winter seep, then steady, then patient and permanent. There is no sign of panic in the way these rooms lie. Bowls lie unbroken. A threshold waits with the calm of a teacher. Sometimes a city does not fall. It changes element. Above him, the surface takes back a little more light. He moves along a low wall where oysters have set their small moons. Time here is layered. Imperial gossip, a fisherman's net snagging on a statue's hand. Spanish engineers raising a fortress on a shore that no longer matches the Roman map. Modern divers tracing sonar lines like needlework. At the ruin in Pozzuoli that we call a temple and was probably a market, the borings of clams mark an ancient sea level on stone. Here, the sea itself is the level, present, and unbothered. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The gate of salt and starlight keeps its counsel, framing the same sky that watched it rise, the same sky that will watch it crumble back into powder and join the plain. When the wind returns, it will carry a dry sweetness across the flats. And on some future night another traveler may taste the air and feel, without knowing why, that a door is near. If they step into it, the world will narrow to a plane of light and widen to an ocean at the same time. The vanished sea will lift in their chest and settle, and the stars will pass in perfect quiet over a threshold that belongs to no city and every soul. He remembers a passage in Strabo. The coast of this region is perforated with hot water, and good for those with illness. The Romans called some of these springs Stygian not because they were evil, but because they smelled like steps toward another place. Baiae used that otherness to make life lighter. When the threshold moved and the sea claimed the basements and then the parlors, the city reorganized, took the shape of tide. Human absence arrived only later, barbarian raids, malaria in stagnant lagoons, populations with other worries. The water was not a conqueror. It was a clerk, changing an entry from villa to reef. Near the edge of the mapped park, the lamp catches a set of steps descending into sand. He follows them down a little way until they vanish completely and replaces the imagined staircase with a memory. A fresco he saw long ago, a garden painted with a fountain, doves on the rim, roses on train trellises, a square of lemon sky. The underwater stones he is hovering over are not sad. They feel complete in their new grammar. The amphora shirred in the silt, the marble dog's paw peeking from eelgrass, the little bronze hinge with a skin of verdigris. They belong. A school of anchovies turns as one body, flashing like a rumor. The man hovers in their shine and feels the oddest emotion. Relief. This city did not drown in a day with shouting. It went to sleep slowly, like a house at night. One window dark, then another, then the last. When he surfaces, the bay is flat and mild. The ruins do not break the skin, and yet they decide the sea's texture. The boat lifts and lowers as if breathing along with the ground beneath. On shore, the lights of modern houses make a shallow constellation. Somewhere behind them, beneath grassy hills, fumaroles whisper, and the thin crust of the world gives back a gentle heat. He towels off and lies on the deck. Above him, stars. Below, a mosaic of their idea. In the morning, he will walk the Serapeum again and run his fingers over the ringed marble, counting the small bored mouths where clams once lived. He will visit the museum and stand before recovered statues from the Nymphaeum of Claudius, their marble wet with carefully sprayed water to remind the eye where they've been. He will nod at the labels, Parco Sommerso di Bea, Portus Julius, Opus Sectal, 1st century CE, and feel that those words are accurate and incomplete. He will think of Lake Avernus reflecting sky from a circular bowl and of Virgil's lines about gates to the underworld. And he will feel, as he does tonight, that gates are less about where you go than how you listen when you arrive. In certain winds, locals say, bells from Potswally carry over the water at evening. Sound glides farther over calm, and on those nights you can hear a tone you can't place. A long, low vowel that seems to come from the bay itself. Acoustic engineers will explain this with humidity and inversion layers and be right. A child will tell you it is the baths calling people home and be right. The earth, through its slow inhalations and exhalations, has a voice. Bai built its life around that voice and then learned to keep living after the voice had shifted key. He thinks of other harbors the sea has adopted, the villas of Portus Julius, the frescoed rooms at Stabi washed by surge when Vesuvius remade the sky, Bai's neighbors to the north in Cumae and Messino where the line between shore and sea moves with stories. Farther away, Neapolis in Tunisia sleeping under waves since the earthquake and tsunami of 365 CE. Garum factories and streets mapped in water. Bai shares their quiet. There is a fraternity of places that learned to be more themselves when they were erased. By noon, the surface will roughen under onshore wind. By evening, the lamplight rooms will recede again into green. For now, on the day's first stillness, the man closes his eyes and almost hears conversation rising from the triclinium below. Soft, amused, the wordless murmur of people being at ease together. It is not impossible that sound persists in water longer than we think, translated into different shapes. Eddies, pressure folds, a polite rearrangement of silt. Or perhaps memory itself is the element he is floating on. He opens his eyes and the bald dome of Monte Nuovo sits against the sky like a punctuation mark. The sentence it ended was not tragedy but a clause that allowed another to begin. City to sea, room to reef, mosaic to mirage. The world writes like that, erasures that are generous, revisions that keep the original meaning present as undertone. Before he leaves, he lowers his hand into the water and stirs a little spiral. Light blooms, small plankton answering with pale fire. The spiral loosens and is gone. Underneath, a checkerboard floor waits with the patience of stone. He whispers nothing to it and hears nothing in return. The exchange feels perfect. When the monk finally turns away, the gate stands small against the day, a minor feature in a kingdom of glare. By noon it will be a mirage in the patient heat, and by dusk the moon will draw its pale tide of radiance back across the flats. Somewhere far under the crust, old water dreams of being sky again. Somewhere in the monk's pocket, a single clear crystal clicks gently against his beads. The desert receives his footsteps, then forgets them kindly. Behind him, A doorway keeps watch over what has left and what returns. A frame of salt and stone holding open the exact size of wonder. Perhaps this place was never meant to be rescued from the sea. Perhaps rescue is not the point. The bay holds a city as a shell holds the idea of a shore. Not ownership, but echo. The Romans built to last. The earth chose to translate. Both were right. He starts the engine reluctantly and points the bow toward Potswali. The wake writes a brief white script on the water and the bay erases it kindly. Behind him, under a small wavering field of sunlight, a garden of marble and dust breathes in time with the ground beneath it and the sky above. Some cities are best remembered by how softly they keep breathing after they disappear. Baiae, with its pearl of floors and its sleeping faces, remembers the sky by wearing it. And the sky remembers Baiae by laying itself down each night on the bay like a veil and letting the mosaics look up through a few meters of ancient, patient light. At the roof of the world, where breath becomes a kind of prayer, there stands a gate carved from ice and stone. It is said to appear only when the air is still enough for a candle flame to hold its shape, when the mountain stops dreaming long enough to remember what it once was. No one knows who built it. It has no mortar, no inscription, only 2 pillars of granite veined with quartz, bridged by a single slab of crystal so clear it catches the whole sky within it. Travelers call it the Gate of Whispering Snow because of the sound the wind makes when it passes through its hollow heart. A sound softer than speech, gentler than silence. The gate stands on a ridge above the upper Himalayas, not far from the vanished monastery of Zanskar. Old maps mark nothing there. Modern satellites show only the white hush of altitude. But the monks who once lived below believed the gate marked the boundary between breath and memory, the last place where one could speak before the mountains claimed all sound. The first modern account came in 1912 from a British surveyor named Captain Rowan. His journals, found decades later in a damp chest in Darjeeling, described the ascent. The wind fell utterly silent at dawn. The river begins in silence. The snow did not fall. It drifted, slow as thought. Ahead, a shimmer like glass, too precise to be natural. 2 pillars, a lintel, and a space so clear one could mistake it for an idea. He wrote that when he stepped through the gate, his breath crystallized midair, forming a ring that hung before him for several seconds before collapsing into frost. He turned to call for his Sherpa guide but heard nothing. Not even the scrape of snow beneath his boots. It was as if the air had become a listening ear. For centuries before that, pilgrims from Ladakh and Tibet had spoken of a singing pass, a place where snowflakes, moving over frozen ground, produce tones like glass bowls. Modern physics knows this phenomenon. Sonic snow. When the flakes are large and dry, the friction between their surfaces can hum at audible frequencies. But at Zanskar, the hum was said to change pitch with prayer. Monks recorded in faded manuscripts that when they chanted before the gate, the air answered in harmony. The vibrations of voice and snow merged until one could no longer tell which sound belonged to which. Not in maps or mountains, but in the faint memory of movement through dust. A dry channel cuts across a plain in southern Mesopotamia, a wide scar of clay and cracked reeds, its shape curving like a forgotten letter in an alphabet of earth. They believed the mountain itself repeated what it wished to remember. It became their most sacred ritual, not to speak to the gods, but to teach the mountain their prayers. In the winter of 1939, a small team of climbers from Calcutta University attempted to locate the site. They found remnants of the monastery, a bell of cast copper cracked neatly in half, fragments of turquoise tiles, the remains of wooden prayer wheels frozen in mid-turn. But the gate itself was not there. Then, on the third night, as wind curled around the ridge, they heard it. The faint, harmonic tone came from the darkness above. A continuous whisper, neither rising nor falling, like a flute played by distance. They followed the sound upward until the snow underfoot changed texture, from soft powder to something smooth, almost glassy. Their lanterns caught a glint of quartz. And then the gate revealed itself. It was half buried in rime, the quartz lintel alive with reflections of stars. Each pillar was etched with vertical grooves, as if shaped by centuries of wind rather than hand. When the breeze shifted, the grooves sang. Multiple notes, soft and layered. A natural pipe organ of ice and stone. They did not cross it. They simply stood and listened. At sunrise the next day, the sound vanished. The gate stood silent. By noon, fog rolled in, and when it cleared, the shape was gone. Covered again by new snow, as though the mountain had closed its own book. Locals call it Wadi al-Nizyan, the Valley of Forgetting. Of the climbers, only 2 returned. The survivors said that the others had gone beyond the ridge to look for a path down the far side and were lost in a sudden storm. But one survivor, before he died years later, whispered to a doctor in Kalimpong. They didn't fall. The snow opened. In the 1970s, glaciologists studying acoustic ice flows recorded unexplained infrasound frequencies near the same coordinates. The tones, inaudible to the human ear, registered on instruments as pulses repeating every 11 seconds. The scientists called it the breathing glacier effect, the sound of air cavities collapsing deep within the ice. Locals called it the mountain's heart. They told stories of travelers who disappeared there but returned years later, unchanged, insisting only a single night had passed. Their voices, it was said, always carried a faint echo afterward, as if another tone hummed just beneath their speech. Modern pilgrims still go, not many and never in groups. They carry offerings of salt and rice, not for any god, but to feed the silence itself. Archaeologists call it a paleo-channel, one of the many dead rivers that once braided the floodplains between the Tigris and the Euphrates before history learned to write its own name. Those who reached the gate described the same sensation. A hum in the bones, a calm too deep to hold thought. Some say they see figures standing just beyond the arch, pale shapes in the snow, neither alive nor spectral, just waiting. An old monk from Spiti once told a journalist, "The gate is not between life and death. It is between noise and understanding." When asked what lies beyond it, he smiled. "Only the sound of your own breath, when it remembers it belongs to the wind." The mountain range itself is ancient, older than most myths. These peaks were once the floor of an ocean, the Tethys Sea, before the Indian plate collided with Asia and raised its bones into the sky. Even now, the rocks hold fossils of marine creatures. Ammonites, corals, shells curled in perfect spirals. Monks collected these and called them Shankalakshana, stones of the sacred breath. They saw in them proof that everything which rises once slept beneath water, that even the highest silence began as sound. A man walks along its bed in the late light of afternoon. His boots sink into soft powder. When he looks down, the ground glitters faintly with flakes of mica, a reminder that once, this valley carried more than dust. Somewhere beneath lies the ghost of a current that once fed gardens and temples, that once heard prayers and children's laughter. Clay tablets unearthed near Eridu speak of a river called Idi Ninurta, the river of voices, a waterway believed to carry not just life, but memory. Priests of that age wrote that its flow was the breath of the gods made visible. Perhaps that is why the gate sings, because the sea still dreams in the mountain. At dusk, the sky grows violet, the temperature drops, snow begins to fall, dry, crystalline, whispering against itself. The wind catches it and threads it through the grooves of the gate, awakening that low harmonic once more. Standing there, you can feel it not as noise but as a pulse in the air. Each tone lingers, rises, folds into another, until all separation dissolves. The snow no longer seems cold. It feels alive, aware. Every gust carries fragments of memory. The sound of chanting, the murmur of streams long frozen, the faint rhythm of breath from those who once stood here and listened. The gate glows faintly from within, its courts filled with refracted moonlight. Through it, the mountains beyond shimmer as if seen through water. The man stops near a bend where the bank collapses into tiers of cracked sediment. Within the layers, he finds a piece of fired clay, faint grooves carved into it, cuneiform pressed by a stylus thousands of years ago. Later, in the light of a camp lantern, he will make out the words. And then, in the quiet between gusts, you hear it. A single syllable stretched across centuries. Listen. By dawn, The wind has shifted. The gate stands clear again, silent, ordinary, a piece of geology among millions. But if you press your ear to its surface, you can still feel the vibration, soft as a heartbeat. Scientists who returned decades later found new ice forming across the arch, layering itself exactly along the old grooves, as though remembering the original tune. When wind passes through it now, the sound is softer, lower, a little sad. Perhaps the mountain is growing old. Or perhaps it is learning how to rest. And yet, the pilgrims still come. When the river closed its eyes, the people followed its dream. Some bring instruments, tuning forks, flutes. They play into the air, hoping to match the gate's note. None ever can. The pitch is always just beyond human reach, a fraction of a tone higher or lower, as if the earth itself insists on keeping the final word. At night, when the stars appear like frost on black glass, the gate stands luminous and alone. Snow drifts through it, pausing for a moment as if to listen to itself before vanishing into the abyss below. No one owns this sound. It belongs to the world before language, to the first whisper between stone and sky. It is said that when the gate finally melts, when the last shard of quartz returns to dust, the mountain will exhale its last song into the world. And that song will circle the planet like a soft tide, entering the dreams of those who have ever listened. Some will wake in the night with a sound in their ears. Not wind, not heart, something older. A murmur that asks nothing, promises nothing, only reminds. He holds it for a long moment before placing it back into the earth. The snow will keep falling. The gate will remain unseen. But its tone, the breath between all things, will never fade. Because even silence needs a doorway. And the wind, patient and eternal, will always find it. The voice softens, as though spoken beside a dim fire. The world has turned its pages in silence tonight. Cities sleep beneath waves. Gates hum in deserts. Rivers dream of seas they have not yet met. The map is drawn in ash. The bells breathe underwater. And the snow listens to itself falling. All these stories, all these quiet places, are not endings. They are pauses in one long inhale. Civilizations rise, vanish, return as whispers in stone and tide. He follows the ancient course for days. Satellite maps confirm that the dry channel once flowed south toward the marshes near Basra, before the sea itself crept inland. There are satellite signatures of buried levees, of silt once deposited in abundance. Scholars from Baghdad and Kyoto have debated whether this was a tributary of the Euphrates or an independent river, now choked by shifting deltas and the weight of centuries. Yet, standing here, the question feels irrelevant. The land remembers more softly than books do. Every ruin is a lung, every echo a pulse. The sea remembers, the desert sings, the mountains listen, and you, drifting now toward sleep, belong to that same remembering. Part dust, part breath, part light that refuses to disappear. Let the sound fade. Let the world turn softly under you. The waves will keep their rhythm. The stars will hum their patient hymn. Somewhere, far below or far beyond, a city breathes again. Not in noise, but in silence. As night falls, the desert cools. The air smells faintly of salt and damp earth, as though something beneath the ground still exhales. The man pitches his tent near the bank and listens. Wind passes through the dry reeds with a hollow tone, like water trying to recall itself. He dreams of soundless ripples spreading across a moonlit surface. Rest there. The story is still being told. At dawn, he walks again. In the distance, a cluster of ruins rises, low mounds, their bricks fused by time. Pottery shards scatter the slope. Among them he finds one fragment painted with the image of a spiral, wave within wave. The same symbol that appears in early Sumerian cylinder seals, associated with the god Enki, the keeper of fresh waters beneath the earth. Temples to Enki once stood at Eridu, built beside springs that gushed upward in the desert, defying reason. Pilgrims called them eyes of the world. Perhaps this river, too, was one of those eyes, a channel between the seen and the unseen. In a nearby cave, a wall bears faint carvings, lines that seem to imitate the shape of flowing water, though the stone has not known moisture for 2,000 years. Beneath the carvings, someone in a later age has written an inscription in Arabic. The river is not gone. It is only sleeping. This sentiment recurs across time. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, there is mention of the deep that remembers, a current beneath the underworld that mirrors the Tigris above. In Egyptian myth, a similar notion appears, the celestial Nile flowing beneath the earth, where the souls of the righteous sail at night. And in Plato's Phaedo, the philosopher speaks of the great rivers beneath the surface of the world, some flowing with honey, others with fire, one with pure water that circles forever. Each culture names it differently, but the pattern endures, the conviction that water never truly dies. It merely changes its direction. The man kneels and brushes dust from a carved stone basin half buried in the sand. It is smooth inside, its rim etched with a pattern of reeds. This, too, has been found elsewhere at Tel Alam at Larsa, ritual basins used in ceremonies of purification. Water was never merely a substance. It was memory given motion. To pour, it was to recall creation. He imagines the ceremony that may have taken place here long ago. Priests in linen robes chanting as they drew the first water of the new year, women scattering petals into the current, a child sent to release a candle into the flow. The river would carry their intentions away, down through delta and marsh into the greater sea, the way breath leaves the body and joins the air. Geologists suggest that around 2000 BCE climate shifted. The rains grew scarce. The great rivers, swollen by meltwater from Anatolia, began to retreat, splitting and abandoning their beds. Inscriptions from the reign of Gudea lament the death of the south channels and the weeping of the marshes. Cities once nourished by these waterways fell silent. Some people migrated north. Others turned inward, literally building temples downward into the old beds, as if to follow the water underground. Among these were the keepers of the last stream, an obscure sect mentioned in a Hellenistic chronicle discovered at Nippur. They believed that when the final river vanished, its spirit would carry the world's stories into the sea, preserving them until the next age of rain. They called this passage the dreaming of the river. The man thinks of that as he rests at dusk, watching the horizon darken into copper. He closes his eyes and imagines water once more flowing here, the sound of oars, the calls of herons. He almost hears it, a faint pulse underfoot, a rhythm like a heartbeat echoing through clay. It's easy to mistake wind for memory in such places. Yet there is something persuasive in that hush, as if the earth itself were murmuring through its crust. Later that night, he lights a small lamp and opens his notebook. He sketches what he's seen, the spiral motifs, the broken basin, the faint carvings of reeds. As he draws, he recalls that rivers have long been humanity's teachers of impermanence. The Sarasvati, once mighty in the Vedic hymns, vanished into desert sands by 1500 BCE. The Oxus shifted its bed until entire oases were left stranded. Even the Nile has wandered across its own delta like a living mind. But this river seems different, not erased, only asleep. Its course remains etched perfectly into the earth, as if waiting. The soil beneath is still moist in places, though no spring feeds it. Some studies suggest underground aquifers still thread through this region, ancient as the Pleistocene, locked beneath strata of salt and gypsum. Perhaps the river of voices still flows there, unseen, whispering against stone. He writes by lamplight until the flame begins to thin. Before sleep takes him, he notes one line. When the sea enters the desert, it remembers who it was. The morning brings a mirage, a sheen across the horizon that looks, for a heartbeat, like water. He knows it is an illusion, yet he walks toward it anyway, guided by instinct. Half a kilometer on, the illusion fades, replaced by a shallow depression littered with shells, spiral and conical, their colors dulled by time. Marine fossils, 10 million years old, remnants from when this basin was part of the Tethys Sea. Layers of memory folding over one another. Sea into river, river into dust, dust into story. He kneels, picks up a shell and holds it to his ear, an old childhood reflex. There, in its hollow, he hears a faint rush. Not real sound, just the whisper of blood in his own body. Yet it feels fitting. Every human pulse carries within it the rhythm of water. We are rivers wearing the shapes of people. He places the shell back into the sand. When he reaches the delta, or what remains of it, the ground turns to soft gray clay. His feet sink into the impression of what was once abundance. The marshes of southern Iraq are visible far to the southeast, vast wetlands that have endured since Sumerian times, home to the Madden, the marsh Arabs. Their reed houses rise like woven cathedrals above water that gleams in the sun. It is said that when British explorers first saw these marshes in the 19th century, they called them the Garden of Eden made liquid. The people here still call their boats mashhuff, an echo of the Akkadian word masu, to draw through water. The man watches as two fishermen paddle by, silhouettes against the glittering plain. The air smells of reeds and distant salt. One of them waves, gesturing toward a cluster of half-sunken stones where the water darkens. He follows and sees that the stones form an ancient foundation, square blocks of limestone arranged in a ring. A temple base, perhaps, now claimed by the marsh. Between the stones, small bubbles rise. Methane, he thinks at first. Then, faintly, he hears a tone. A note pitched low, like air escaping a flute. He bends closer. The sound repeats. A pulse. Then another. The bubbles rise in rhythm. The fishermen cross themselves and whisper a word he doesn't recognize. Something meaning the sleeping one. They row away quickly. He stays, listening until the sound fades back into stillness. Later, in his report, he will write that methane seepage can produce rhythmic resonance through reed structures underwater, creating what might be perceived as tonal sound. He will note this with care, with restraint. Yet, when he reads the line aloud to himself, it feels dishonest. What he heard was not gas or resonance. It was breath. Before he leaves, he fills a small vial with water from the marsh and seals it. It is warm to the touch, faintly briny, clouded with silt. When shaken, it releases a soft shimmer, as if the light itself were dissolved within. That night, back in his tent, he dreams again of the river. It moves slowly, not toward the sea, but into the earth, sinking, folding, finding a deeper route. Its bed becomes a mirror of stars. He watches figures walking beside it, their lanterns bobbing like constellations. They do not mourn the river's disappearance. They follow it into the dark, trusting that it will one day surface again, perhaps in another world, under another sky. When he wakes, dawn is pale and soundless. The vial rests beside him, the water perfectly still. He holds it up to the light. Inside, a single air bubble moves, rising, falling, rising again. Somewhere beneath this land, a current still stirs, not lost, only listening. Perhaps that is what the ancients meant when they said the river dreamed of the sea, that every silence is only waiting for sound, and every ending is simply the earth remembering how to flow again. The temple does not begin in ruin. It begins in reflection. Even now, as the diver's lamp drifts across the seabed off the coast of Egypt, the temple's walls still shimmer with the faint geometry of sunrise. Pillars aligned perfectly with the east, even though the east is now a ceiling of water. The surface above glitters like stained glass, and through it, faint rays fall upon the columns of a place once dedicated to a god who loved the sun. This is the Bay of Abu Qir, near the mouth of the Nile. Here, 1,000 years before the birth of Christ, the city of Thonis Heracleans stood, a harbor of worship, commerce, and tide. And here, beneath 7 meters of shifting sand and water, lies its holiest site, the Temple of Ammonius Jerub, a sanctuary of both air and sea. Divers discovered it in 2001. Its pillars collapsed like reeds in current. Coins, anchors, colossal statues of granite, all preserved in silt as if laid gently to rest. But the divers never expected to find what they did beneath the temple's base. Another structure, older by centuries, perfectly aligned beneath it. A temple beneath a temple. It had sunk once before. The temple that sank twice. The phrase has haunted archaeologists since it was first noted in the expedition journal of Frank Gaudio, the explorer who mapped the ruins of Thonis. His team's sonar scans showed 2 layers of sacred architecture, one Greco-Egyptian, one entirely Egyptian, far more ancient. The lower temple, sealed by sand, revealed no sign of collapse. Its floors were intact, its carvings untouched. It seemed less destroyed than buried, preserved intentionally, as if the priests themselves had entombed it in the sea. The man exploring it now swims through the silent corridors where light ripples like breath. The columns rise like tree trunks, their surfaces coated in soft algae. Around him, the floor is littered with offerings. Small alabaster vases, shards of glass, tiny gold beads. He imagines the rituals that once filled this space. The hum of hymns, the scent of burning myrrh, the soft echo of sandals across polished stone. The temple had been built at the meeting of 2 waters, the fresh Nile and the salt sea. It was said that prayers spoken here reached both realms, carried by dual currents. The priests who served in it were known as the listeners of the tide. Their task was simple and eternal, to keep the balance between land and ocean, between breathing and drowning. In the diver's light, carvings emerge, processions of figures bearing vessels of water, pouring them into channels that lead nowhere now. The inscriptions speak of renewal. The sea rises, the god descends, the temple endures. Perhaps they believed that sinking was not failure but transformation, a way for the temple to remain alive even when the world changed around it. The first sinking, historians say, came with the earthquake of 230 BCE. The delta fractured, and the city slipped a few meters into the mud. Instead of rebuilding, the priests built upward, sealing the old temple with sand and coral, then constructing a new sanctuary on top, mirroring the one below. They performed a rite called the doubling of the house, recorded faintly on a stele later found in Canopus. The ritual declared that what is buried below will mirror what is raised above, that the gods live in both the depth and the dawn. It worked for centuries. Pilgrims still came, bearing lotus garlands and small models of ships. They lit lamps in the outer courtyard and watched as the reflections danced on the water pooling at their feet. They did not see the sea as a threat. It was an extension of divinity. To them, the temple was not drowning. It was breathing between 2 worlds. But time is patient, and so is water. The second sinking came quietly between the 5th and 8th centuries AD. Records from Alexandria mention a great trembling of the earth and the swallowing of cities. The Nile shifted course. The sea rose. Within a single lifetime, Thonis Heraclean disappeared. The temple's upper structure folded gracefully into the waves, its statues falling without breaking, its doorways closing like eyelids. What remains now is both the temple that stood and the temple that sleeps beneath it. It is the only sanctuary known to have lived twice, one life above water, one below. The diver glides into a chamber at the rear, his lamp revealing a statue lying on its side. A figure of Ammonius carved in diorite, his features serene, his eyes half open. Around the statue, coral blooms like incense smoke. A school of small silver fish circles his face, their movement delicate, reverent. The diver imagines the priests performing the festival of rebirth here, the moment each year when the Nile's flood arrived. They would gather at dawn, standing in ankle-deep water, chanting hymns as the light entered the sanctuary. Inscriptions from similar temples describe the ritual. The god is awakened with sunlight, bathed in pure water, and then allowed to sleep again as the tide recedes. Even now, the diver can see how the architecture captures that rhythm. The temple is not static. It is tidal. He turns toward the rear wall, where a line of hieroglyphs runs like a slow prayer. That which sinks is not lost. That which sleeps shall speak again. Above water, in the museum in Alexandria, a fragment of this same text lies under glass. Scholars debate its meaning. Some think it refers to seasonal flooding. Others see it as prophecy, a reminder that civilizations fall only to be found again. But the diver, hovering there in the dim green light, feels something deeper. The words seem not carved for posterity but whispered for comfort, as though the priests who carved them already knew their city would fall. He remembers the modern echo of their story. Philae, the temple that was drowned by the rising waters of the Aswan Reservoir in the 20th century. Engineers moved it stone by stone to higher ground, yet its original island still sleeps beneath Lake Nasser. The story repeats, always the same pattern. Temples sinking, rising, moving with the tides of human will and Earth's restlessness.